I'm Lucy Johnston, and this is GB News Originals. Today, we're going to talk about a new legal showdown that could rewrite the rules in Britain's museums and galleries. Award winning choreographer Rosie Kay is taking the University of Leicester to court over what she sees as woke gender guidance that she says is unlawful, unsafe, and silencing dissent. The guidance already adopted by major cultural institutions is telling museums to let people choose toilets by self identification, erase biological sex from labels, compel staff to use ideological terms, and unlearn so called binary thinking. Rosie and her colleague, museum specialist Denise Fahmy, say this is discriminating against gender critical staff and pressurizing institutions into risky policies. And if they win, this could force museums, galleries, and universities across the UK to tear up similar policies in what may become the most important cultural free speech case in years. Hi, Rosie. So, Rosie, for people who haven't followed this, can you tell me exactly what the legal fight is about? You've done a pre action letter, haven't you, to the University of Leicester. Why is it so important?
So, Freedom in the Arts, the organisation I co-founded with Denise Fahmy, we've formally threatened legal action. So it's like a kind of pre-action warning, really, against the University of Leicester, and it's regarding their trans-inclusive culture guidance for museums, galleries, and heritage organisations. And you're absolutely right; it's the first legal challenge in the UK arts heritage sector, and their guidance is really important. Um, it's the research centre for museums and galleries, and that's considered a thought leader in the UK cultural sector. Um, the guidance we feel is it's widely adopted, it's very influential, it's sector defining, but our legal case argues that it misstates the law and it promotes unlawful policies. It also suppresses lawful protected beliefs. So we've asked for immediate withdrawal and revised materials, and asked that they represent the law properly across all protected characteristics. I can go into further detail, but yeah.
Well, let's talk about some concrete guidance. So, what you're saying is this guidance from the University of Leicester has been adopted across the arts world, and it's widely so. But can you give me some concrete examples of what the guidance says and why you disagree?
So I'll just go through it. Kind of, it's quite detailed, but I'll kind of give it in sort of
A few
bite-sized
examples.
explanations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So first of all, the definition of trans is misused. The guidance repeatedly treats trans as including non-binary, gender fluid, and gender non-conforming identities, and then equates those with legal protections under the Equality Act. But actually, only those undergoing or intending to undergo gender reassignment, as defined in the Equality Act, are legally protected. So that blurs the legal boundaries and leads cultural institutions to apply the law inaccurately. It repeatedly
So
misstates.
what's wrong with protecting people who may eventually go on to take medical action? Why would that not be a good thing?
Well, it's just that gender reassignment is the protected characteristic under equalities law, and it sort of makes out that a non-binary identity, for example, somebody that sort of says that they're non-binary, says that that is also a protected characteristic, and that's just not the case. That's not the case under the law. So it's sort of taking one thing and then it's sort of lumping a whole load of other things in, and it's also it's kind of this. Um, they're claiming that they're the legal experts, and then they're asking all the other arts organizations, museums and heritage to accept this as law when it isn't. It isn't at the starting point. It also it says
What's the downside of this anyway? Like, why are you so, uh, why do you feel there's a need to take some action against this this issue?
so
Why?
so there's sort of this another very concrete areas around the toilets and facilities which breaches the law, and the guidance. Once you've kind of said that anyone can be anything, It then tells organisations to let people use the toilets and changing rooms that they feel most comfortable in. And that actually may be a breach of workplace health and safety law, which actually constitutes a criminal offence under the Health and Safety Work Act of 1974. So institutions following that guidance, they actually risk unintended illegality. So that's quite a serious thing, as we've seen with the Sandy Peggy case up in Scotland. Um,
We might not, some of our viewers might not know about that, but anyway, yeah.
yeah, there's a really complicated sort of like lines within the law, but it's actually taking away certain protected rights of women. That's a very concrete case around toilets and changing rooms. The other part of it is the suppression of both gender critical beliefs. So that can affect women that see that male and female are different characteristics as protected under law, but it actually also can suppress free speech. It can be very difficult for people if they have religious beliefs, and that actually starts to go into discrimination sort of practices. So telling your staff that they have to unlearn binary thinking, and it also suggests that manifestation, so even expressing gender critical beliefs, could be unlawful. That's not true, and actually, gender critical beliefs are now a protected belief under the Equality Act, following Maya Forstater's case. So the advice is chilling lawful speech, and that again exposes employers to to discrimination claims. And I think more and more women will be thinking about this if they're facing sort of harassment in the workplace.
So have you got any real examples of how people expressing gender critical beliefs has led to problems? I think your own case is one, perhaps.
Well, this is kind of really one of the cruxes of why we've got standing in this case. Is both Denise Fahmy and I really suffered for expressing particularly normal mainstream beliefs. We're both, long experienced professionals in the arts. I was cancelled for expressing views at a private dinner party that then went on to mean that some of the dancers lodged complaints against me, and my board basically folded, didn't know how to deal with it.
What
And
what did you express? And I think that was 2021, was it? I think. Is
that's right.
that
So it's
right?
4 years
Yeah.
ago this
What did you
August.
say
I
that
just
led
said that
to
women are real. Women are real, and then I even kind of went into detail about the very dangerous birth of my child, and while, absolutely love my husband, no man is ever going to go through the same experiences of childbirth. Anyway, these were seen as sort of offensive beliefs, and while I knew that they were not offensive, it was kind of, it's just amazing the hysteria that surrounds women defending women's rights.
what happened to
Denise,
you? Just briefly talk about what
yeah.
happened for those.
So I went under one investigation and I was exonerated, and I apologized for any upset caused, but I didn't kind of say that my beliefs were wrong. I refused to do that. And so
What were you
one of the
investigated for? For
uh,
being
I don't,
anti-trans?
yeah, I don't know. Like, this is it. It wasn't even very clear what I'd done wrong.
Who was investigating you?
So my board were investigating. So I'd become a charity, and I'd stepped down and become, although the company was called Rosie Kay Dance Company, I'd stepped down as a director in order for it to become a charity, because it was a regularly funded arts council organisation. And so actually, I think everyone's so scared of like reputational risk, that when these complaints came up, the board overcompensated really, and didn't sort of already seem to take sides. I also felt like I'd kind of reached my level of fame in the dance world by having my own views and having really sort of good ability to do sort of investigative research. I knew what was going on. I've done work with the British military. I've looked at conspiracy theory. It's really important for me to have not just my own mind, but be able to express what I'm seeing in the world. And this whole movement around the trans agenda, I thought and still do think it's absolutely massive because it's an attack on reality. And if they can convince everybody to believe something that isn't true, or to have to say that they believe it's true, even if they don't believe it, I see that as a real threat to democracy. So I was willing
You
to
have to
make a
accept that
stand.
there are, sorry, forgive me for interrupting. You must accept there are people that genuinely believe and feel and never stop feeling they were born in the wrong body, and they have the right to do whatever they want to do with that. It's up to them. But that is a real phenomenon.
I mean, I come from the wonderful world of the arts where identities and beliefs blur all the time. However, there's a hard edge to this. And when it starts to affect women's rights and also the safeguarding of children, I feel that it's gone too far. And people can have their beliefs, but so much public money has gone into propagating these beliefs. And it's the imposition of these beliefs onto other people that I think is that's the threat to freedom of expression.
One could argue that the actual dangers and the risks have been overhyped by the gender critical side, that most people who believe they're in the wrong body are not rapists, are not going into a toilet to look at children or abuse women or whatever it is. And this is a tiny, tiny thing that's been overblown and over politicized. And that they would argue that their position is one of being on the back foot, and that they are being sort of screened out or discriminated against, and that's the hardest fight. What would you say to that?
Well, I think that the statistics around like why sex is a protected characteristic is because women are at more risk from men. And we do actually have to discriminate between men and women because of that heightened risk. And really, when you give a kind of loophole to an entire group of people, as that become almost a sacred caste, we've seen it with priests, you've seen it with sports coaches. Trans is almost like another way that predators can hide and exploit a loophole. Now, those protections are there not just for our safety, they're also there for our privacy and our dignity as women. Women and need toilets often for different reasons. So I don't think it is a small thing asking for the protection and dignity of women and children. That's really fundamental to how a society exists. And if you look at the history of women's rights, you'll have heard of something called the urinary leash. That women fought very hard in the sort of Victorian era, coming up towards the suffragettes, to ask for public toilets because then they could engage in public life. And so there's sort of a big history of women actually needing to have protection and dignity around their needs, their physical needs. And so I think as I said, I'm really relaxed about people's beliefs and what people want to do. But when you're starting to look at really more than half of society that say no, then women should be listened to.
Can you talk to me how bad it is now for people with gender critical views? I know you've done some really good research into this, and how people feel they can't speak out. And have you got any examples of what's going on? It'd be good for those of
Oh,
us not.
yeah, goodness. So part of my job with Freedom in the Arts is I kind of a triage artists that come with issues, and find out what's going on with their case, and then I'm able to kind of point them in direction either for legal support, PR support, or just general support. So since setting up Freedom in the Arts, I think I've supported more than 100 kind of emergency cases, and some are absolutely devastating. So we
Forgive
felt
me,
that.
Freedom. It's the organization, I should have introduced it, the organization you set up to look into this problem and this issue, and you've done some research in that. Yeah. Sorry, and you've come across some more cases. Yes, let's go into that. Yeah.
Well, yes. So we did a survey that we reported the results of in May this year. Called the report's called "Afraid to Speak Freely," and it's really readily downloadable, and it's quite an easy read actually, which is really spells out what the issues are. And we were able to compare it with an arts professional survey that was taken on censorship and intolerance in the arts in 2019. So just before COVID, and I wish I'd read it then, I might have known what was going on a little bit more and not got into the trouble that I did. But we can compare it directly, and more than 84% of people that work in the arts, so that's artists as well as arts workers, directors, senior figures, more than 84% said that they no longer speak freely ever or rarely. So we've really got an atmosphere where
How many
everyone
people were in that
so
survey? Sorry, it's important to know,
it,
yeah.
it was almost exactly the same as the arts profession. It was just under 500 people were surveyed.
Okay,
Yeah. And then we
so a
took
good
a good representation. We took 12 case studies and sort of had a look at them, and we did find that gender critical beliefs was the most terrifying subject. As somebody in the survey said, mention it and it's literally career suicide. So it's the big one, and then the other two are anything to do with Middle East, like anything to do with the Middle East and Israel, Palestine particularly, and then any criticism of what you could probably describe as critical race theory, anti-racism policies. So if you push back, we had an artist who pushed back a little bit to an anti-racism policy, saying that he believed that he wanted to follow Martin Luther King's sort of tenet of not judging people by the color of their skin. Well, he lost his job over saying that. It was a little bit more complicated by that than that, but that's a real hot topic as well. You can't criticize anti-racism policy.
yes, so this sort of cancer culture. I mean, your colleague Denise Fahmy has described the arts as a Narnia's permanent winter for free speech. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, another senior producer said it's an atmosphere of fear and loathing, and I thought that was a really good way of putting it, because there's constant fear, but there's also nobody's in the art to be in a kind of really authoritarian environment. I don't think it suits artists' temperaments to be under control in such a way. And so you kind of loathe the atmosphere. But then I think also when people don't speak out and are silencing themselves, I think it starts to erode something in them. It makes it harder and harder to make good art, to make authentic art, to really think and question, because people aren't talking to each other anymore. People are too scared to. And that's dreadful. That really is dreadful.
So really, it's about being able to express your beliefs and your views on things without, or for people in the arts to be able to express themselves without fear of being cancelled or silenced, but also around crossing the law. Do you feel that there are areas that you've seen where the law is being broken? And are there any examples of that where sort of this ideology is, if you call it ideology, is crossing into legal boundaries?
I think the there's a huge amount of ignorance actually about the law, and that's quite shocking. People really think that they can kind of make it up, misrepresent it, almost make the law they want to make, and that there won't be any consequences to that. And what's happened is that anybody saying, even just pointing out that this might be problematic, they then become the victim of discrimination and harassment. Now, that is a legal matter in itself also. So there's two things going on. There's the misstating of the law, and then there's the bullying and harassment of anyone that even points that out. Do you see what I mean? So I'm not conflating the two things, but they're creating an atmosphere where calling for, say, privacy and dignity in one area can end up with you being harassed, victimized, and pushed out of your job. And I think you just have to look at the success rate of the employment tribunals of anybody that's expressed those views. Shows, somebody like Jo Phoenix at Penn University, she was absolutely harassed and targeted by her colleagues. And that's what we see across the arts sector. Now, just because Denise and I express gender critical views, actually, we really do try and be an impartial organization. What we feel is that arts organizations need to bring back a good sense of impartiality and not take sides all the time. Start to really understand what the Equality Act says at its core, which is that you need to protect all 9 characteristics. There isn't a hierarchy in equality. You've actually got to treat everybody fairly and decently.
So, how does your legal fight sort of tie into the wider national debate on sex and gender and safeguarding, particularly after the Cass review, which looked at how children were being treated with gender dysphoria, they call it, or with confusion about their gender and medicalized?
So we quite deliberately actually don't go into children and safeguarding in this case. I think that's possibly a whole nother new case actually to look at trans policies and safeguarding of children and age appropriate content for children. Um, with this case, actually, I think what's been really important is the Supreme Court ruling with the Four Women versus Scottish Ministers case, and very much like this guidance, this trans inclusive culture guidance for the University of Leicester, it's always been unlawful. It's still unlawful, and we've got the support now of the Supreme Court to explain really why it's unlawful. So I think lots of
And that
people are
rule that a man was a man and a woman was a woman, and those it was very binary, wasn't it? That Supreme
So,
Court
so,
ruling,
so
yeah.
what it does is it means that gender reassignment as a protected characteristic doesn't supersede the definition of sex as a protected characteristic. So for the definition of sex, that is biologically born a male or biologically born a female, and gender reassignment is a separate protected characteristic. So it's just sort of the whole thing's got conflated, but actually, when it comes down to protections for women, that means biological women. So that also includes like why you can discriminate to exclude men who identify as women in women's spaces such as prisons, hospitals, rape centres, and also toilets and changing rooms. So that's where the Supreme Court's just made it clear what we all knew for about a century, but now we seem to not know. And there are there are sensitivities to that. Nobody's calling for discrimination or harassment of trans identified people. Nobody is at all. But we're just asking for protections around sex.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who have transitioned who say they feel extremely uncomfortable going into a toilet that they don't feel, meets is their gender, and they feel that they are the people that are persecuted and harassed. But what you're saying is this is about, is that right? About protecting women because they are vulnerable,
I
rather
honestly I
than
think
ideology of yourself. Yeah.
and people are totally free to campaign for third spaces or for separate cubicles. I think what we've seen in certain really horrific cases are that certain people, certain men are using this loophole actually to assault or predate on women when they're vulnerable. So, that's why, yeah.
Understood. Yeah. So do you think your case could set a precedent beyond museums for schools, universities, and other public spaces? Do you think it's got wide ranging?
Well. Hopefully, that would be great, and I think lots of people are doing different things in each of their own sectors. Um, for us, we've really seen how the arts have suffered under sort of forced ideological beliefs and are much less welcoming and actually much less inclusive place than they used to be or they should be. So hopefully it will make people just sit up and take a little bit of notice. We're asking for the guidance to be withdrawn. We're asking them to acknowledge that it misstates the law. And we're asking that we're involved with any new guidance. In fact, we offered that to the University of Leicester, and before we wrote this formal letter of legal action, and that was rejected. So we say offers still on the table. Please speak to us or Sex Matters or the other amazing organisations that want to get the law right.
So if you win, what would you change and how quickly? What would you actually do?
Well, I mean, really, I suppose, speaking personally, my long-term aim is that everything stops being a place of warfare. It feels like it's very divisive and it's constantly pitting people against one another. And really I don't think that's helpful. I don't think it's moving forward anybody's rights. I don't think it's going to help young people feel inspired to get the benefits of the arts, to join the arts as a profession. Um, and I think probably a lot of lawyers are gonna make a lot of money. So I would really call for kind of like just a calming down of the rhetoric. We're seeing the enormous livelihood implications and health implications that all this kind of bullying and harassment causes, and start to kind of use the arts as a way to explore complex issues around the depths and heights of humanity, not about enforcing ideological beliefs on anyone. I really think we're going down a dangerous, dangerous path. And every time the arts are used as a battering ram, we very much know that we're in the realms of propaganda and authoritarianism. And I'm standing against that really wholeheartedly.
So, for those watching who may be afraid to speak up, who've experienced harassment or bullying for their gender critical beliefs, what would be your message to them? What would you say?
Well, uh, really drawing strength together is our best protection, really. So reach out. Freedom in the Arts is a totally confidential organization. There are way, way more people supporting this. It's kind of being really led by a few very noisy people who see the benefits for themselves. And actually, more and more people are speaking out, but do it sensibly, do it calmly, you know, make sure you've got support around you, and we will support you.
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating to talk to you today, Rosie. Thank you. And be interested to follow the case as it goes through, if it gets to the court. This is GB News Originals. Please don't forget to like and subscribe below and download the GB app available now in the App Store. Thank you very much.